Welcome to J-Life with Daniel. I'm your host, Rabbi Daniel Levine. I'm recording now on Sunday, January 1st at about 10:20 a.m. And so first and foremost, I wanted to wish each and every one of you a happy New Year's. And I truly hope you're able to find whatever you're looking for in the upcoming year of 2023. About 2.5 hours ago, I actually just got back from Los Angeles International Airport after a 16-hour direct flight from Ben Gurion in Tel Aviv with 39 local college students after a 10-day trip taking them all around Israel. So needless to say, on the one hand, I am absolutely exhausted, I'm jet-lagged, and it was a long journey. And if you hear the sound of a cup being lifted and putting down, that is me drinking yet another cup of coffee this morning. But on the other hand, as so often happens when I come back from these long and exciting trips, I come back with a renewed energy and passion for Jewish life, Jewish education, and the wider world of Israel. So often, when I'm in Orange County, when I'm in Southern California, teaching and talking to people about Judaism, Jewish history, and Israel, there's a fundamental disconnect. I'm telling them about stories that happened thousands of years ago. I'm telling them about a place that exists thousands of miles away. But all of a sudden, when we're able to actually bring students over to the land, to the history, to the culture that I talk so excitedly about all day on campus, something clicks. And the 10-day trip doesn't just become another interesting international trip, but truly, for both many of the students and myself included, it really becomes a life-altering event that builds a community where at the end of the trip, the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts. Needless to say, I really hope that in an upcoming episode, I want to actually explore taking students to Israel, and hopefully I'll actually bring my co-staff that I had on the trip on for an upcoming episode. But on this New Year's edition episode, I actually wanted to focus on something a little bit different. I was actually sitting at the gate getting ready to board with the college students when the clock struck midnight, when 2022 ended and 2023 started. And I got onto a 15-hour flight right about the time of New Year's. Now we have a tradition. This is a tradition that both exists in the secular world and also in the Jewish world with our New Year's of Rosh Hashanah, which is every New Year's we reflect on the past and we look at what we hope to do this upcoming year. And so on this episode, I wanted to take a couple of minutes and reflect on some of the ideas that I really wanted to try to focus on in 2023, both in terms of me personally, but also in terms of some interesting ideas that I hope will affect the wider community and the individuals within it. I want to title this episode, The Paradox of Finding Meaning. And I want to be really clear about why I want to talk about the search for meaning on this first podcast of the year 2023. I fear that we're living in somewhat of a paradoxical time in the modern world. And this is a paradox that I've spoken at length at other points, but I really think this is the singular issue, which is the most important thing to be talking about in our era when it comes about personal well-being. And that is as follows. By all measures of human well-being, be it access to resources, access to housing, to food, to shelter, to all of these things that throughout the wide, vast array of human history, the majority of humans were lacking and uncertain about. We are living in some of the best times imaginable in human history. We have the most amount of resources. We have the most amount of material goods. But yet, when we actually look at measures of happiness, belonging, contentment, all of these different factors that coalesce into this vague thing that we find, that we term, do you find life meaningful? We're at actually one of the lowest points in human history. Now, this certainly isn't something new. I don't think anybody listening to this podcast is shocked at this premise. This is something that psychologists, sociologists, mental health professionals have been talking about and warning us about for years. But I wanted to focus a little bit on what I'm calling the paradox of finding meaning. And I want to start as follows. We oftentimes try to center our commitments and how we live about our day and what things we're attached to around the meaning that we find in it. How often do we ask ourselves, do I find this idea? Do I find this community? Do I find this other person, perhaps this religious tradition that I'm a part of, meaningful? If I do find it meaningful, then great. I'm going to make a personal commitment of myself to that entity. I'm going to commit my time, my resources, my money. But if no, we oftentimes implicitly think to ourselves, then there's no reason for me to have a commitment to that other thing. How quickly do we abandon hobbies? Do we abandon and give up on difficult family relationships? To partners, to friendships, our commitments to ideas, communities, politics, religious traditions. We have a problem here, which is that we oftentimes view meaning as an a priori need in order to subsequently commit to anything. So we go around the world imagining waking up day after day, week after week, month after month, scanning the world, scanning our wider society, saying, where can I find meaning? And we spend our days going about, running around, searching for this elusive term of meaning, of contentment, of happiness. And yet, day after day, when we don't find the holy grail of meaning or happiness, we go to sleep, we end our day, we end our weeks, perhaps we end our year thinking, oh well, I didn't find meaning and happiness this time, but tomorrow surely I'll discover this elusive holy grail of happiness and meaning. I want to call this the problem of commitment. The problem of commitment, just to review, is that we oftentimes aren't willing to commit to something unless that thing is initially making us happy or filling us with meaning. Well, the first problem with this approach is immediately apparent, which is that nothing, no matter how initially meaningful, will be meaningful for all time. Any career, any hobby, even any relationship is of course going to go through highs and lows, and our commitments to said things must be based on more than a simple reductionary litmus test of, is it meaningful at any given moment? But that actually isn't what I want to talk about right now. Because I think there's actually a much more fundamental problem in this approach, whose effects immediately come apparent when we consider the sad reality that the vast majority of people who, again, have access to all the material goods one could imagine, still report having little to no meaning in life. And therefore, those same people have little to no deep-rooted commitments. And this, of course, creates a self-fulfilling prophecy and self-fulfilling cycle. So today, I wanted to usher in the new year with a radical proposition. I want to propose that our fundamental equation is actually flipped upside down. We have it all wrong. We are fundamentally mixing up our cause and effect. My premise is simple. We shouldn't be waiting to find meaning and happiness to then lead us to commit to something. Rather, it's actually the other way around. We need to commit to something in order to ever find meaning in it. There was a whole series over the past 10 years of really counterintuitive psychological studies. I always love these psychological studies because I think they highlight and elucidate ideas that, upon deeper reflection in our religious tradition of Judaism, our people have known, have been talking about, have been writing about for thousands of years. And yet, suddenly, with the tools of modern social psychology, we're slowly gathering up and building data to support these findings. So this psychological study was simple. They took two groups. One group we can imagine was a control group where they had, I'm going to make up a number here because I don't remember the exact number, but let's say the control group was 100 people. So they had 100 people, and those people every week had to measure how happy and how much meaning and satisfaction in life they were feeling. But they were to make no other noticeable changes to their week after week. So this is the control group. The other group, they sat in a room, and they said, we are doing an experiment on how to increase happiness, how to increase meaning. So we want you to make sure over the next couple weeks of the study to be as happy, to find as many meaningful experiences as possible in these weeks of the study. Needless to say, when they actually came and went through the data of these two groups, the group that was constantly in search of happiness and finding meaning tended to report much lower scores on their overall happiness and meaning. This highlights a wider idea that the worrying, that the thinking about the need to be happy, the constant feeling that I need to find what's meaningful, is actually a cause of unhappiness and will actually stymie, it will block, it will thwart any real search for meaning that we can have. But let's think about this now on the other way around. My premise, my proposal, that in order to have meaning one must make a commitment, comes without all the added stress, anxiety, and worry about when that meaning will come. A commitment means that you are by definition living for something beyond yourself. A commitment means that you take another person, a community, an idea, a tradition, and you say, what's important is not only my personal well-being, my personal happiness, and my personal well-being, rather that of the greater tradition, the greater good, the greater community, this other person who I'm in relationship. And now let's tease out how this can have a radically different effect. And I want to actually do this through the frame of one of my favorite and one of, I believe, the most challenging books that's been written about Judaism in the past 100 years. The book is called Halachic Man, and it was written by Rav Soloveitchik, who is often credited with being one of the founders of the American modern Orthodoxy movement. And Rav Joseph Soloveitchik writes this book called Halachic Man, where in it he proposes a radical, essentialized commitment to Jewish law and practice. But importantly, he doesn't attempt to base his ideology in terms of higher truths or in terms of finding meaning. What do I mean by that? So Rav Soloveitchik writes this book, Halachic Man, and it's all about how halacha, how Jewish law and tradition, should be the guiding way in which a Jew is supposed to view the world. Now, whether or not we accept Rav Soloveitchik's fundamental premise, let's take that as an aside for now. But Rav Soloveitchik writes this book, Halachic Man, that says that one should go through the world with an a priori commitment to Jewish law. Now, let's differentiate this between two other Jewish approaches. And I'll call one approach the ultra-Orthodox fundamentalist view, and the other approach the liberal Jewish informed choice view. So the ultra-Orthodox fundamentalist views would say, if asked why one should be a part of Judaism and Jewish tradition, they would perhaps reply to you by saying, because it's true. What do you mean by it's true, you ask them? Well, they say, we have documented proof that God came to Moses on Sinai and gave him the Torah, and our people have been passing down this tradition from generation to generation ever since. Therefore, these ultra-Orthodox Jews would suggest we have to be committed to Jewish tradition because it is true. Now let's look on the other side. Because I believe the liberal Jewish community is actually playing in to a lot of the same pathologies, albeit on opposite sides of their fundamentalist counterparts. The liberal Jewish community is all about this idea of informed choice. This idea of, let me just learn about different Jewish ideas, rituals, and practices, and then I'll pick and choose what's meaningful for me. Now, the first problem, of course, is that many in the liberal Jewish community aren't actually informed enough to be making informed choices. But I've dealt with that in other writings and other podcast episodes, and as a self-identifying liberal rabbi, which I am, this is a point that I actually care a lot about and would be more than happy to discuss or tease out in any future episodes. But I think the much more fundamental problem with this idea of informed choice is that it falls into the same trap of viewing meaning as a means to commitment, as opposed to a commitment as a means to finding meaning. What do I mean by that? Well, the idea of informed choice from the liberal Jewish community suggests you look at the wider span of Jewish tradition, you think about which individual things make you happy, which individual things bring you satisfaction, which individual things add meaning to your life, and almost like somebody shopping in a grocery aisle, you pick and choose various products because those are the things that are meaningful to you. Perhaps this works for some people, but over time, again, I think that the meaning slowly ebbs away. Because if everything is about meaning, we end up like these people in the psychological experiment, where if I view, let's say, making Havdalah every Saturday night as meaningful, and I'm only doing it every Saturday night because it's meaningful, after a while, even if the meaning ceases, I'm stuck. Because if my commitment is only based off of finding meaning in something, meaning is a fleeting emotion, and you can't always depend on it as a backstop. Now let's take the middle road. Let's tease out Rav Soloveitchik's view. What he suggests is that Judaism is an a priori system. What does it mean that it's a priori? It means that one should not follow Jewish law or Jewish tradition, and one can imagine this either as a total commitment to Jewish law, as Soloveitchik does, or what I'm proposing, even a partial commitment to Jewish tradition and Jewish community as an a priori system. Meaning you should not choose and you should not be committed to various acts of Jewish community and Jewish tradition, either only because you think this is true with a capital T, or because you find meaning in it. But it's actually the other way around. It is the act of commitment itself that actually allows us to find both truth and meaning in our world. So I want to challenge everybody here in the upcoming year to make a year-long commitment to something in the Jewish community or Jewish tradition. Perhaps it's going to synagogue or getting involved in the community on a consistent basis. Perhaps it's a steadfast commitment to some weekly Jewish ritual, such as perhaps Kiddush Friday afternoon or Havdalah to end Shabbat on Saturday evening. Or maybe it's a commitment to some type of Jewish learning. Tanakh, Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash, Parsha. There's so much to choose from. And I hope that throughout these commitments, we are all in the upcoming year able to cut through the paradox of the elusivity of meaning in 2023. And before you know it, before we all know it, we will be living a life with much more meaning than we ever could have possibly imagined. Happy New Year.
Do